Hey, this is Greg. Welcome to the channel. Well, Stanley Druckenmiller is one of the greatest investors of all time. He's been in the business for many, many years. He's one of the masters of the universe, known as one of the greatest macro traders of all time. And he's here today. I've got a special treat for you. I've taken excerpts from his recent interview at the Sohn conference this year. And his interviews are very rare, so this is a special treat. I'm going to play clips from his interview, and then I'm going to make comments. He talks about the economy, he talks about the massive failure of Fed policy, and he talks about what he thinks are the probabilities of the coming recession.
As you know, I've been saying for years that my observation was the worst economic outcomes tended to follow asset bubbles. I was only looking at the past 100 years or so, and Edward Chancellor's book, in a real tour de force, describes how this has been going on for over 500 years. And basically, every time you've had interest rates below 2%, going back 500 years, it's generally been followed with difficult economic times. So if you look at the current menu, I think it was actually just a little over 2 years ago, I went on national television and said we had monetary policy that was the most reckless and extreme relative to the economic circumstances I had ever seen. And at that time, inflation was 2.5%. You had a booming economy. You were coming out post-COVID, and it was clear post-vaccine that we were on our way to maybe the most rapid recovery I had seen in my lifetime. I was not surprised about a year later that inflation reached 9%. I was not surprised that SPACs went crazy, Bitcoin went crazy, Dogecoin went crazy, equities went crazy. What I was surprised by was that for the next year, while all that happened, Jerome Powell's Fed continued to have their foot on the gas. They continued to buy $120 billion a bond a month while rates were zero. This obviously led to everything I just described. Then, realizing they had probably made the biggest mistake in the history of the Fed, they slammed on the brakes. They've raised rates 500 basis points in the last year. We know historically two things which you've already articulated. Number one, the worst economic outcomes tend to follow too easily engineered asset bubbles. And number two, big maxim in my business, don't fight the Fed. So I'm sitting here staring in the face at the biggest asset and probably the broadest asset bubble, forget that I've ever seen, that I've ever studied. It went on for 10 or 11 years. And then as the grand finale, the government spent $5 trillion on COVID. The Fed financed 60% of it. And as I just described, now we have a big hike in interest rates. It's hard to look at that constellation of factors, know that we've only had a few soft landings since 1950. All of them were preceded by what I would call proactive rather than reactive Fed policy, and believe we're going to have a soft landing. One never knows, but if you're just looking at the odds, they're very tough. In terms of the timing, I have much less certainty on that than I do on whether we're going to have a hard landing or a soft landing. The timing is difficult, but I will say, you've already noted, in our shop, we tend to use anecdotal information a lot. It's somewhat mixed. Housing, which has tended to lead historically, is actually fairly robust. Travel, restaurants, stuff like that is fairly robust. But other stuff, trucking, which has been a guiding light for my firms in terms of economic forecasting with a 6 to 8 month lead time, actually, since I got in the business, is extremely weak. We're hearing bad anecdotes from retail. And then, of course, you have you've already mentioned it, the banking problem. We always knew, given what I've already described, there were going to be bodies out there. When you have free money, people do stupid things. When you have free money for 11 years, people do really stupid things.
Free money, people do stupid things. When you have free money for 11 years, people do really stupid things. I love that. I love that. That was great. Well, on this initial clip, he touched on a lot of things. I think he is basically making the point that even if you go back 500 years and look at every period where monetary policy provided free money and then dramatically increased the interest rates, there has always been, with maybe a couple exceptions, a recession that followed, and in most cases, a rather severe recession. Now, the Fed's failings at this point are nearly legendary, okay? He referred in his comments here proactive versus reactive Fed. In the cases where he saw that the recession was either a soft landing or non-existent, were situations where the Fed policy was more proactive. Clearly, in this case, it's been reactive, and it's been merely reacting to these massive mistakes that they made after the COVID pandemic and after the economy was already recovering strongly. The Fed kept interest rates too long for too low and continued to completely flood the market with liquidity by buying $120 billion of securities every month. This, along with the massive $5 billion of fiscal spending, caused the economy to explode, so to speak, and caused inflation to go out of control. So ever since the Fed realized that inflation wasn't transitory, they've been reacting to data. Data's been coming out showing strength in different areas of the economy, showing strength in different areas where you have still high inflation, even though the headline number is coming down. He made reference to housing. He made reference to travel and leisure. Those are still showing very strong statistics. However, he did not mention unemployment, which the employment situation is still extraordinarily tight, which is still very inflationary, but he thinks that the timing of it is rather uncertain. But I think what I got from this is he is forecasting a severe recession, and he's basically saying that it's inescapable at this point. Let's continue.
So there's stuff under the hood. It's starting to emerge. Obviously, the regional banks, recently we had Bed Bath & Beyond, but I would assume there's a lot more bodies coming. The regional banks, the median regional bank has 43% of their loans in commercial real estate. About 40% of that is office. As you know, we've had this huge change in lifestyle due to COVID. Number one, the great resignation, but number two, people aren't going to the office. So we have actually a higher vacancy rate than we had in 2008. So I put all that together, and I look also at the inverted yield curve. The timing has always said sort of third to probably fourth quarter of this year to first quarter of 24. But the recent anecdotes, the banking problems, I wouldn't be surprised if the bean counters a year from now, as they tend to do backward looking, that the thing started sometime in the second quarter. I don't know that, but I do this for a living, so I got to have a forecast.
I love that. I do this for a living, so I have to have a forecast. That's great. I think that he, again, is not questioning whether we are going to have a recession because of the magnitude of the interest rate increases 500 basis points in a year. I think he's just merely questioning the timing, and of course, zeroing in on the timing of when these recessions are going to occur is very difficult. I thought it was interesting he brought up another variable being the banking crisis and how that could affect the economy. He didn't refer directly to that, but I think that's what he was referring to. And that is another impediment to economic growth. If you have the banks pulling back, that's going to hurt the economy because it's going to make capital more difficult for individuals to access, and also small businesses, which are the backbone of the American economy, and also many people are employed by smaller businesses. So I think the windup is for stock investors, you have to be cautious in here, because I do not think that the stock market is discounting a recession in terms of earnings and in terms of multiples. I mean, it's just not. It's just not. Multiples are at 18, 19% on the S&P. You know, and I think that earnings estimates are still far too rosy. And so I don't think the stock market is discounting a recession. Once we go into a recession, it's going to be too late, because then the earnings forecasts are going to come down and the valuations are going to come down. So I want you to be cautious in here. I want you to have a lot of liquidity, and I want you to be super liquid when the shit really hits the fan and the opportunities abound. And that's when we're going to make comments on this channel. Now, I edited this down to a very small portion of the total interview. The total interview is about an hour long. If this video does well, and if people are interested, give me your comments below. I will do a second and a third installment so you can get the full picture. But until then, I'd like you to take a look at this video. And I think this video will be of interest to you because it goes into further detail on the markets and the future of the economy. So thanks for watching. And if you got value out of this, please subscribe and like. I'd love to have you on board for future videos. So until then, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.